This story was submitted by someone we'll call Michael, an experienced backpacker who had been camping solo for over 15 years. Michael prided himself on finding remote locations where he could enjoy complete solitude and pristine wilderness experiences. In late September, Michael hiked deep into a national forest area that required a multi-day trek to reach. He had researched the location extensively and obtained all necessary permits for backcountry camping. The area was known for its difficulty of access, which meant few other campers would venture that far from established trails. After 2 days of hiking, Michael reached what appeared to be a perfect camping spot, a small clearing beside a mountain stream, surrounded by dense forest. As he began setting up his tent, he noticed signs that someone had camped there recently. There were rocks arranged in a fire circle, and several logs positioned around it like makeshift seating. Michael appreciated that previous campers had followed leave-no-trace principles by using existing fire rings rather than creating new ones. He set up his tent and began preparing dinner as the sun started to set. Everything seemed perfectly normal until he took a closer look at the established campsite. Hidden partially under fallen leaves, Michael found items that previous campers had left behind. But these weren't typical camping gear. There were dozens of photographs scattered around the fire ring, all showing the same camping spot from different angles and at different times of day. Some photos appeared to have been taken during different seasons, suggesting someone had been returning to this exact location repeatedly over a long period. More disturbing were the personal items mixed in with the photos: jewelry, wallets, car keys, and identification cards belonging to different people. Michael counted items from at least 8 different individuals, including driver's licenses from various states spanning several years. Michael realized he had stumbled onto what appeared to be a predator's collection site. Someone had been using this remote location to ambush unsuspecting campers, taking trophies from victims over an extended period. The photos suggested meticulous planning and surveillance of the area. As darkness fell, Michael faced a terrible decision. He was 2 days' hike from the nearest road, with no cell phone coverage and no way to contact authorities. Leaving immediately would mean hiking through unfamiliar wilderness in complete darkness, but staying might mean encountering whoever had been collecting those items. Michael decided his best option was to pack silently and move to a different location under cover of darkness. As he was breaking down his tent, he heard something that made his blood run cold, the sound of branches snapping as something large moved through the forest toward his campsite. Michael grabbed his backpack and fled deeper into the woods without his tent or most of his gear. He spent the night hiding behind a large boulder, listening to sounds of someone moving around the campsite he had abandoned. Through the darkness, he could see a flashlight beam searching the area where he had been camping. At dawn, Michael carefully approached his original campsite. His tent had been slashed open, and his remaining gear was scattered everywhere. More photos had been added to the collection, including several pictures of Michael setting up his camp the previous evening. Someone had been watching him from the moment he arrived. Michael hiked out as quickly as possible and immediately contacted park rangers. When authorities investigated the site, they found evidence linking the location to several missing persons cases spanning 5 years. The remote location had been deliberately chosen because victims couldn't call for help, and rescue efforts would be delayed by the difficult terrain. The predator was never caught, but the investigation revealed a pattern of experienced campers who had obtained permits for that area and were later reported missing. Michael's discovery helped authorities connect several disappearances to the same location and suspect. Michael still camps, but never alone and never in areas more than a day's hike from help. He learned that extreme isolation, while appealing to serious backpackers, also creates opportunities for predators who understand that remote locations offer them significant advantages over potential victims. This account comes from someone we'll call Sarah, a 28-year-old photographer who frequently hiked alone to capture wilderness landscapes. Sarah was an experienced hiker who knew how to navigate safely and always informed others of her planned routes and return times. Sarah was on a 3-day solo hiking trip in a remote mountain wilderness area, planning to photograph autumn foliage at several scenic locations. The trail she was following was well marked but rarely used, requiring advanced hiking skills and multi-day planning. On her second day, while photographing a waterfall about 6 miles from the trailhead, Sarah noticed a man watching her from across the creek. He was standing motionless about 50 yards away, partially hidden behind trees. When Sarah looked directly at him, he didn't move or acknowledge her presence. He just continued staring. Sarah felt uncomfortable, but tried to rationalize the encounter. Solo hikers sometimes kept their distance from strangers for safety reasons, and the man might simply be taking a break or enjoying the same scenery. Sarah packed her camera gear and continued on the trail. An hour later, Sarah stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook. As she was eating, she noticed the same man again, now positioned about 100 yards behind her on the trail. He appeared to be following her route, but maintaining distance. When Sarah stood up and waved, the man immediately disappeared behind rocks. Sarah realized she was being deliberately followed. In remote wilderness areas, encountering the same hiker multiple times was normal. Trails often led to similar destinations. But this person's behavior was clearly predatory. He was tracking her movements while avoiding direct contact. Sarah decided to test her suspicions by deviating from the established trail. She took a side path that led away from her planned route, hoping to lose the stalker or force him to reveal his intentions. After hiking for 30 minutes on the unmarked path, Sarah found a concealed position where she could observe the main trail. Within minutes, the man appeared on the main trail, moving quickly and obviously searching for Sarah's tracks. He spent several minutes examining the ground where Sarah had left the established path, then began following her footprints onto the side trail. His behavior confirmed that he was deliberately tracking her. Sarah was now in serious danger. She was miles from help, with no cell phone coverage, and being hunted by someone who clearly had experience following people through wilderness terrain. Her stalker was systematically cutting off her escape routes and driving her deeper into unmarked territory. Sarah decided her only option was to use her knowledge of the area to create distance and confusion. She knew of an old logging road about 2 miles away that would eventually lead back to civilization. If she could reach it without being followed, she might be able to get help. Sarah began moving as quickly and quietly as possible toward the logging road, using techniques she'd learned from wildlife photography to avoid making noise. She periodically stopped to listen for sounds of pursuit, and twice heard the stalker moving through the forest nearby. As Sarah approached the logging road, she heard something that terrified her. The sound of an ATV engine. Her stalker wasn't alone. Someone was waiting at the logging road with a vehicle, meaning this was a coordinated effort to trap her in the wilderness. Sarah realized she had walked into a hunting scenario where multiple people were working together to isolate and capture a victim. The remote location had been chosen specifically because it offered limited escape routes and no possibility of outside help. Sarah hid in dense undergrowth and waited for several hours until the ATV sounds moved away. When she finally reached the logging road, she found tire tracks and evidence that someone had been waiting there for an extended period. Her stalkers had clearly planned this operation in advance. Sarah followed the logging road for 8 miles before reaching a Forest Service station where she could contact authorities. Park rangers and law enforcement organized an immediate search of the area, but the stalkers had disappeared completely. The investigation revealed that Sarah had encountered a group that had been targeting solo hikers in that area for months. They used the terrain's natural funnel points to drive victims toward predetermined capture locations. Several hikers had reported similar stalking incidents, but Sarah was the first to escape and provide detailed information about their methods. Sarah learned that predators sometimes work in teams to exploit the isolation that attracts serious hikers to remote areas. The same wilderness characteristics that provide solitude and challenge also create opportunities for coordinated criminal activity. Sarah now hikes with partners and uses satellite communication devices even in areas where cell phones don't work. She also varies her routes unpredictably and never follows established patterns that could be studied by potential stalkers. The final story comes from someone we'll call David, a 35-year-old teacher who was on a week-long camping trip in a remote national forest area. David was an experienced camper who had obtained all proper permits and was familiar with Forest Service regulations and procedures. David had been camping alone for 3 days when a man approached his campsite wearing what appeared to be an official Forest Service uniform. The man introduced himself as Ranger Williams and said he was conducting routine campsite inspections to ensure compliance with fire safety regulations. The fake ranger appeared professional and knowledgeable about Forest Service policies. He examined David's campfire setup, checked his food storage methods, and reviewed his camping permits. Everything seemed legitimate until the ranger began asking personal questions that had nothing to do with camping regulations. The fake ranger wanted to know if David was camping alone, how long he planned to stay, whether anyone knew his exact location, and if he had satellite communication devices. These questions seemed unusual for a routine inspection, but David answered politely, assuming the ranger was concerned about emergency preparedness. The situation became clearly threatening when the fake ranger insisted on examining David's backpack and personal belongings, claiming he needed to check for prohibited items. When David asked to see the ranger's identification and badge number, the man became evasive and aggressive. The fake ranger claimed that questioning his authority was a federal offense, and that David could face serious legal consequences for non-cooperation. He demanded that David hand over his satellite communication device and truck keys, supposedly for safety verification purposes. David realized he was being robbed by someone impersonating a federal law enforcement officer. The fake ranger's behavior had escalated from official inspection to clear criminal activity. David was isolated in a remote location with someone who understood that impersonating federal officers would make victims more likely to comply with demands. David tried to remain calm while refusing to hand over his belongings. The fake ranger became increasingly threatening, claiming he had authority to arrest David and confiscate his equipment. When David continued to resist, the fake ranger reached for what appeared to be a weapon. David managed to escape by running into dense forest where the fake ranger couldn't follow easily. David spent several hours hiding before carefully returning to check on his campsite. The fake ranger was gone, but so was most of David's gear, including his food, communication equipment, and vehicle keys. David was now stranded in a remote wilderness area with minimal supplies and no way to contact help or reach his vehicle. The fake ranger had effectively stolen everything David needed to leave the area safely, creating a survival situation that could have become life-threatening. David had to hike for 2 days to reach the nearest Forest Service station where he could report the incident and get help retrieving his vehicle. Forest Service officials confirmed that no legitimate ranger inspections had been scheduled for that area, and that the description David provided didn't match any actual Forest Service personnel. The investigation revealed that the fake ranger had been targeting remote campers for months, using authority impersonation to gain compliance and steal valuable outdoor equipment. The isolation of remote camping areas made victims easy targets, who often had expensive gear worth stealing. Most disturbing was how the fake ranger had studied actual Forest Service procedures well enough to appear legitimate during initial contact. He understood camping regulations and used official terminology to establish credibility before revealing criminal intentions. The fake ranger was eventually arrested after attempting the same scam with a group of campers who included an off-duty police officer. Authorities discovered he had been studying Forest Service training materials and had stolen authentic-looking uniforms and equipment to support his impersonation. David learned that criminals sometimes exploit the trust people place in authority figures, especially in remote areas where verification of credentials is impossible. The isolation that makes wilderness camping appealing also makes campers vulnerable to anyone willing to impersonate law enforcement or Forest Service personnel. David now carries backup communication devices and always verifies ranger credentials through official channels before complying with any requests. He also learned that legitimate Forest Service personnel follow specific protocols and would never demand immediate surrender of personal property without clear justification.